Black power, y'all. How y'all doing this morning? Dang, I can never pin. I can never pin that comment. I don't know why. Give me one more thing to do. How y'all doing this morning? Black power, y'all. Y'all come on into the room, please. So we can get started with the book trap, the revolutionary book trap this morning. Black power. How y'all doing this morning? Y'all ready? Let me get onto my laptop so I can read y'all's comments a little more easy. Black power, Daniel. My laptop is old as dirt, and it died. I had everything set up, and then it died as soon as it was time to go live. So I'm gonna be working on getting back into Facebook on my laptop so that I can see y'all's comments and then I don't miss anything. But I do have the PDF in the comments, and I also have the donation links in the comments. I don't know why I can't pin them, but they are there. So just FYI on that. But we will get started here in a few minutes. I'm gonna give it just a couple more minutes before I start getting into everything, the announcements. I'm here by myself this morning because my comrade had to work on the plantation, so you know how that is. But yeah, we're still gonna have fun this morning, and we're still gonna go over this. I mean, this was such a heavy piece of the book, and I mean, this is my first time reading this book. I'm really excited about it. Lots of good information, and I just can't wait to discuss it with y'all, see what y'all thought. So have your hashtag read that back ready so we can get into this black literature. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I gotta get a new laptop. This is pitiful. But we gonna do it. We are still gonna do it. What y'all eat good this morning? Y'all eat anything good? Anything nutritious? Anything that's good for brain power? Some omega-3s, stuff like that. Make sure that you share the video. I think I found it. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. Make sure that you share the video if you haven't. Share on all your social media pages. Y'all, they're gonna make this hard for me. Here we go. This is what I want right here. All right, let's get it. All right, because yeah, I just want to make sure I can see y'all's comments easier. All right, so yeah, I hope y'all ate something nutritious this morning, something for brain power, omega-3s, avocado, all that jazz. So let me know what you had to eat this morning. Daniel said I had a slice of pizza, but the rest of the day is going to be veggies. I think that's a good plan. Yeah, because we gotta eat good. I know that could be a challenge sometimes, but we gotta eat good. So y'all, a couple of announcements before we get started. Some really exciting stuff is going on with Black Hammer right now, y'all. We are working. When I tell y'all we are working, we are working. So we got another food drive coming up in the Atlanta area. Tentatively, it is scheduled to happen December the 28th. in the Atlanta area. We're going to have it at the Woodruff Park and the Hertz Park. So we're going to cover 2 different areas. Details are still developing around that. So be on the lookout for some flyers about that. And we are taking donations for the food drive. So right now, the same place that you donated the last time, $Blackhammer.org, you can donate there. Black Power Diva, how you doing, sis? And make sure y'all share this again on all your social media platforms. We want to make sure that this information gets out there. But we are planning another food drive in the Atlanta area. In the East Coast region, their chapter is having a meet and greet on December the 15th. It's at Nabby's Place in Baltimore, Maryland, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. So if you're in the area and you want to get to know what we're doing, what we're about, as far as what Black Hammer is about, if you want to learn more about the organization, that's where they're going to be. They will be getting information to you. They're going to come with pamphlets. They're going to be able to give you our principles of unity so you know how to get involved with the organization. And this is something that we're planning to do across the nation. So anywhere that we are going to be setting up and, hopes of getting to know the people of the community so we can, do this work. So those are the announcements right now. We're doing more stuff than that, but, we'll be bringing that to you in the episodes to follow. Before we get into it, I want to know what's on your bookshelf. So hashtag what's on your bookshelf. If there's something you're reading that you want to know, that you want to put on our reading list and something that we might get to where we might read it in the Revolutionary Book Trap, drop it in the comment section so we can make sure that we put that on our list. We're going to read a great variety of things that we want to discuss, just so long as it has to do with African and colonized, liberation, freedom, art, culture. That's what we want to share. So, but y'all, what did y'all think about the second half of chapter 1? And I have this version. There are several versions out there. The PDF is also in the comment section if you need it. If you want me to, all right, that's a good read, Daniel. Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. That's actually something I have that I haven't read yet. But I have this version, so the page numbers, when I'm referring to page whatever, it may not be the same as yours. And the PDF, if I'm not mistaken, that's a whole different thing. So I'm going to try to do my best to kind of let you know where it's coming from so we can all be at the same place. But we are starting at what is under development today. Because we read last week about how Walter Rodney describes what is development. And basically what I can recall from that is he describes development as the ability for us to, the country or the area's ability to be able to protect itself against natural disasters, to be able to produce and feed its population and things of that sort. And of course, we see that European countries tend to have the ability to produce on a large scale, the ability to feed and that type of thing. And we know that based on what we've read so far, that comes at the exploitation of other countries. And I'm sorry about the light, y'all. You can see that I have a big forehead, so work with me, okay? But this light is a little bright, but I'm trying to work with it. But today we're going to be talking about what is underdevelopment, and I definitely want to know what you guys had to think about it. I took lots of notes, and I'm going to do my best not to spend too much time on any one particular area, but I do want you guys to share and get people to watch, and then also if you have comments and things that stood out to you, make sure you drop it in the comment section. So on my book, in my book, it's on page 13 that we're starting out in, what is under development. And he actually, since he's already laid out what development is and how we think about that, he goes into, it really would only make sense if you understand what development is to define underdevelopment. And on my page 13 in the first paragraph, he says it is very much tied to the fact that human social development has been uneven from a strictly economic viewpoint. Some human groups have advanced further by producing more and becoming more wealthy. And I outlined that, or I underlined that, or highlighted that because I think that was something that we need to take into context when we're thinking about, we do have economic, you have to think about the economic implications when you're thinking about development versus underdevelopment. Thank you, Deepa, because I've always been a little bit insecure about my forehead, and this light isn't helping. So, but anyway, but yeah, so economic development and the ability, and when we think about economic, we have to think in means of not necessarily, money. We're thinking about resources and the ability to produce resources to support the population. And then also social development is what he also outlined here. He goes on to say that the moment one group appears to be wealthier than others, some inquiry is bound to take place as to the reason for the difference. So, of course, what do we see? We see European countries, they have this development, this, this industrialized, sense of socialization, all these factories and things of that sort, whereas these African countries or these indigenous countries do not. And we think that it's something to do with their failure to be able to keep up with technology and things of that sort. Let's see, socials. Okay, let me go back. So yeah, that's something that we definitely want to pay attention to here. Going into page 14, I thought I highlighted a paragraph here that I thought was very important. And this actually happens to be my read that back. But if you have a read that back, again, go ahead and post it in the comment section. But he says, and he's going into the comparisons in, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and then you're looking at countries or civilizations in Europe, North America, and that type of thing. It says a second and even more indispensable component of modern underdevelopment is that it expresses a particular relationship of exploitation. And this is something that we talked about last week. Black Power, Dia, I miss you, comrade. I can't wait for you to come back next week. I miss my comrade. Yeah. So, a particular relationship of exploitation, namely the exploitation of one country by another. All the countries named as underdeveloped in the world are exploited by others. And the underdevelopment in which the world is now preoccupied is a product of capitalist, imperialist, and colonialist exploitation. African and Asian societies were developing independently until they were taken over directly or indirectly by the capitalist powers. When that happened, exploitation increased and the export of surplus ensued, depriving the societies of benefit of their natural resources and labor. And that is an integral part of underdevelopment in the contemporary sense. So I want to know, I miss you. So I want to know what you guys think about that. And, when we think about, even like today, we have most of us, when we think about whether we would actually move back to our homeland, it's not enough to say, well, if we're, we notice that there's a contradiction in the Americas and North America, Europe, and the powers that be here, and then we could just move back and go back to Africa. It is not that simple because there's a level of exploitation that's going on there. There are, the colonization still takes place in those areas in Africa, and us moving back there, even in Massey, would not change that. We have to recognize that there's the resources are not dominated by the people there. They're dominated by the people that have taken over that land to capitalize off of the natural resources there. So the foreign powers that are in Africa have done that and have been doing it for a while. And again, this book was published back in 1969. So these are things that Walter Rodney wrote about even then, and it's still a very real reality now. And Diva says it's by design. Wow, yes, that's to read that back. So we want to recognize that's the key word that is going to continue to resurface here is exploitation. And I really like how Walter Rodney lays out that is the relationship that Africa has with any of the capitalist powers. So it's to really compare Africa, Asia, or any of these other places that have a underdeveloped society. It's not because they're intrinsically lazier or less intelligent. It's because there's an exploitive relationship that came about from Europe, that invaded and infected these other places. So I think that's very important. Let's see, in page 14. So yeah, what do you guys think about that? I really want to know. I want to see what you have to say about it. Something else on page 14, it goes into saying in some quarters, it has often been thought wise to substitute the term developing for underdeveloped. One of the reasons for doing so is to avoid any unpleasantness which may be attached to the second term, which might be interpreted as meaning underdeveloped mentally, physically, morally, and of any other respect. That's important to kind of internalize too, because, that's something that's attached to that term. Underdeveloped is, they're not as smart, and which was something that we just said. And it says, actually, if underdevelopment were related to anything other than comparing economies, then the most underdeveloped country in the world would be the USA, which practices external oppression on a massive scale, while internally there is a blend of exploitation, brutality, and psychiatric disorder. Y'all, are y'all reading this with me? Because again, they will attach these other things mentally, physically, and morally to the underdeveloped term, and they will relate it to Africa, they will relate it to Asia, they will relate it to any Latin America or indigenous population, but they would be the ones that would be considered this based on the way that they've acquired their capital to begin with. And I think that is so important that we grasp that, because again, some of us think that there's something innately wrong with our motherland, and it's not the motherland, it's the invaders of that land. So I want to know what you guys have to think about that. Before we go into per capita income, and I think this is going to be really important because there's a graph that I really want to discuss, and it's very it's alarming, yet also very sobering as to why. Diva says, I just feel like it's crazy that our entire lives have been told that these countries are poor. Let me see if I can see the red. Okay. That these countries are poor, and not to the fact that this nation and many others are stripping them of their wealth. Yes, it is. It's extremely crazy. It's extremely crazy. And that's why we're reading this book, because leave it to any other text out there, something that you would have gotten in your colonial school setting. It will be just the other way around. It will be that this was acquired fair and square, and that these other countries were they needed help, and USA to the rescue, right? So anyways, so what do you guys think about that? Thank you, Diva, for that. Again, if y'all read that back, put that up there so we can go into that. When he goes into economic comparisons, this is where he starts to talk about per capita income. He says at the bottom of page 14, economic comparisons can be made by looking at statistical tables or indices of what goods and services are produced and used in the societies under discussion. There's something that's really important in here that I definitely want to spend time on, because it talks about trade and things like that, and how other countries or other capitalist countries, they trade with each other and they get a certain amount of profit based on the goods that come from where they're getting it from. And then when they're going to Africa to get certain goods from there, that the trade is already uneven, because they're going there only willing to pay this much for a certain good that they need to have, but they know that there's there's already an exploitative relationship between that capitalist country and whatever said country in Africa, and that they're not going to give them nearly what they should for that specific good. But where he starts to talk about per capita income, and I really appreciated how he defined it. On page 15, he says, it is enough to note that the national income is a measurement of the total wealth of the country, while the per capita income is a figure obtained by dividing the national income by the number of inhabitants in order to get an idea of the average wealth from of each inhabitant. This quote unquote average, he has that in quotation marks, can be misleading where there are great extremes of wealth. A young Ugandan put it in very personal form when he said that the per capita income of his country camouflaged the fantastic difference between what was earned by his poor peasant father and what was earned by the biggest local capitalist, Madvani. In considering the question of development away from the state of underdevelopment, it is of supreme importance to realize that such a process demands the removal of the gross inequalities of land distribution, property holding, and income, which are camouflaged behind national income figures. So I want to stop there for a second, because the reason why it's so important, and then there's a graph that we're going to go into here in a second. And I said my page 15. Remember, that can be a different page in whatever version you're reading. But this is coming from the paragraph that begins, economic comparisons can be made, which is not too far after we start the what is underdevelopment subtitle. So if you skip down to that paragraph, you'll see where I'm reading from, where it talks about per capita income and national wealth figures and that type of thing. And the reason why I think it's important that we look at that is because you get a certain figure. I'm going to, for the sake of being somebody who was born in the American continent, I'm going to give you that. And just from the figures that we can see on that, it's a graph, or a graph that you can find, where it says it's going to give you a list of countries, and it's going to give you per capita income in dollars. And this is coming from 1967. So those figures obviously will have changed. But I can guarantee you that the implications are still very similar to what they were then. But the USA, the per capita income in US dollars was 3,578. And then you go down and you look at African countries, and they give you Africa as a whole. In 1965, it was $140. Then they go down and they break down these different countries in Africa, and they'll tell you what their per capita figures are, which are very much still, that's an average. That $140 from Africa as a whole is an average of the entire continent. You got South Africa that has a figure of $543, and he talks about that, and that's the highest per capita supposedly in the whole continent. Then you've got Congo had $52, Malawi has $52. But what I'm saying, like as far as like the USA, do you think that figure applies to the African and or colonized families on a large scale? Those figures don't represent what our wealth would be from our families. In fact, we've gotten recent research that indicates that the wealth gap is actually widening between black families, colonized families, and that of white families. So that's a very real thing. And what he's saying is that the per capita income of a particular country isn't necessarily reflective of because you can have one or two families that have a large amount of wealth, and that's going to skew the data to reflect that everybody in the country has the average, because this one family or these two families have this amount of wealth, but the rest of the population has wealth way down here. But that skews the data to look like it's somewhere in the middle that everybody's getting at, and then that's not accurate. Something that would help me to understand it better would be like, let's say you're in a classroom and you've got one person that got an A+ in the grade, but then everybody else had somewhere around a C average or something like that. Okay, so how you get a grade or how you get like an average is you basically take all those numbers, everybody's grade in the class, and then you, however many different students you have or that took that participated in getting the grade, you divide the sum of all those averages by the number of students there were in the classroom, and then that gives you your average for the classroom. So you have the one person that had the A plus, and you had everybody else that had the C plus. So your average is probably going to be somewhere around a high C or a B. But that's not necessarily reflective that the majority of the class got a C. We can flip that and say, let's say you had everybody got an A plus except for maybe two people, they got an F, they failed, or a really low grade. Then that A plus may become more like an A minus or a B, because you had some really low grades that pulled that whole average down. So that's what we're talking about here when it comes to per capita income. You have some very wealthy people in all of these countries, and that particular wealth figure is not truly reflective of what everybody has access to. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so Himani says, in addition to this reading, also reading Barracoon by Zorazil Herson, and After the Deluge by Kara Walker, not revolutionary per se. Okay, well, yeah, that'll be something we should look into, and we'll add that to our What's on Your Bookshelf. Thank you for that, Himani. So, yeah, so I thought that was important because, like I said, we want to make sure that we are looking at this from a standpoint that we realize that there, in pretty much any country, there's going to be a wealthy family, wealthy population that has a majority of the wealth or is getting a majority of the wealth, whereas the majority of the population does not have access to those resources. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So what do y'all think about that? Thank you, Diva. So yes, it does. What do y'all think about that? What are your questions about that, if any? So yeah, back to that table though on my page 16, but you should be able to find the table fairly easily. It's just basically going to give you a breakdown of all like these countries. You got Canada, USA, France, and the United Kingdom. And I want you to look at these figures. And again, this is from 1967, but you got 2247, 3578, $1,378 in France, 1,560 in the United Kingdom. Then you go down to Africa, because I mean this book is focusing on Africa, but you got the Congo has $52, Ghana has $198, Kenya has $107. I mean, just the stark difference. I mean, even as Africa as a whole, $140 as a whole, and this was in 1965. And again, those changes have not, those figures have not changed. If anything, they've gotten worse. The level of exploitation has gotten that much worse. Further down on page 15, it says the gap can be seen from the evidence is not only great, but also increasing. Many people have come to realize that the developed countries are growing richer quite rapidly, while underdeveloped countries, for the most part, show stagnancy or slow rates of growth. In each country, a figure can be calculated to represent the rate at which the economy grows. The growth rate is highest in socialist countries, followed by the big capitalist countries, in which the colonies and ex-colonies trailing far behind. So, I mean, and I thought that was interesting that the growth rate was shown to be that's highest in socialist countries, whereas socialism is supposed to be an enemy to everything, right? So I mean, thank goodness for research and science. But I thought that was something that was kind of important to kind of focus in on. But really, I really want to know your thoughts. If you're just joining us, make sure that you share it on all your platforms, share it in all your groups. We really want to make sure we get people out there to listen and discuss this book with us. This is a really important book. And again, my comrade and I last week, we were talking about how important it is. This is the only way that we can really learn about our history. This is the only way that we're going to learn about ways that we can turn around our conditions. So studying material like this is, typically they're not going to recommend these types of books in your colonial school setting, not even in your universities and your colleges. You have to actually seek this information out. So this is one of the few places that you're going to get information like this where we discuss it. So make sure you share it. Black Power Chikande, thank you for joining. Diva said they use these figures to hide behind them and justify their exploitation. Of course they do. And he's going to get into that. But what he also says is that, there's some sort of moral reasoning behind why they want it to seem as though those countries didn't get these access to these things because they were lazy, and we have access to them because we're more intelligent, and there must be some idealist reason why we're chosen to be in a better predicament than what they are. But also, the book club does serve as a fundraiser. So if you're able to donate to the book club, you can donate at BH Book Club. It's all together, $BH Book Club. I didn't say that earlier. The links are in the comments, so you can find the links there. You can donate to any of the other platforms to GoFundMe. You can also donate directly on the website. But this is so we can get this to be better. The presentation can look better. We want to get mics. We want to get actual cameras. We want to make it to where, this is going to look so much more professional than what it looks now. We raising money for that. Black Power Chikande. And so what do you guys think so far, though? Because this is, I really want to know how you guys are internalizing all this information so far. On page 6, my page 16, right after the graph, it goes, developed economies have certain characteristics which contrast from underdeveloped ones. The developed countries are all industrialized. That is to say, the greater part of their working population is engaged in industry rather than agriculture. Most of their wealth comes out of mines, factories, and other industries. They have a high output of labor per man in industry because of their advanced technology and skills. This is well known, but it's also striking that the developed countries have a much more advanced agriculture than the rest of the world. So, I appreciate that he's going into this here, because a lot of the countries, like we're talking about Asia, Latin America, he talks about how those are mostly agricultural countries, but he also says that the yields of those countries, their land, their agriculture is unscientific, and it still does not produce the amount of food and the amount of resources that it needs to actually sustain a civilization, which is why you see so many people starving in those types of situations. Black Power Robert, thank you for joining. Make sure you guys share if you haven't already shared it. And so he also goes into the correlation between the amount of steel used in the country he says that's an excellent indicator of the amount of industrialization. And he talks about, he said at one extreme, one finds that the USA consumes 685 kilograms of steel per person. Sweden 623, and East Germany 437. At the other extreme, one finds that Zambia, which is a country that's in Africa, consumes 10 kilograms, East Africa 8, Ethiopia 2. And when the same kind of calculation is made for sugar, an example that of the results show Australia with 57 kilograms, and North America and the Soviet Union 45 to 50 on average. Africa, however, only consumes 10 kilograms of sugar per person per year, and this is better than Asia with 7. And he's going to go into food and nutrients, and that's also a really important factor, because aside from industry and the ability to produce the food, then you have the ability for the people that live there to consume the food. And what are you always seeing in pictures of African babies and how they need this and they need that? Well, yeah, it's because it's the land is being exploited. But, those people are starving and they don't have access to clean water or food and things of that sort. And so when he goes into talking about that and what that means and everything, that is because you don't get the access to the food because, one, somebody else is exploiting the resources for you to be able to do that. It says, even more gloomy than a set of statistics relates to basic food requirements. Each individual needs a certain quantity of food per day measured in calories. And then this implies that if you have a group of people who are not getting their basic nutritional needs met, then how are they going to be able to form industry or to develop? Because you're starving to death. You're starving to death. The desirable amount is 3,000 calories per day, but no African country comes anywhere near that figure. Algerians consume on average only 1,870 calories per day, while Ivory Coast can consider itself very well off in an African context with 2,290 calories as the national average. So the 1870 from Algeria, that's a little over half. And even like the Ivory Coast, which if you think about where they are, they're a little more accessible to the ocean where they could fish and get food that way. They're getting a little bit more, 2,290 calories as a national average. Furthermore, one can also has to judge the protein content, and you have to think about protein has a lot to do with brain development. Okay. Many parts of Africa suffer from protein famine, which means that even when calories are available from starchy foods, little protein is to be found. Persons in developed capitalist and socialist countries consume twice as much protein food as those in underdeveloped countries. Such differences can help to make it clear which countries are developed and which are underdeveloped. Thank you for sharing, Robert. I know I bring up Amos Wilson a lot, and I hope he's going to be on our reading list at some point down the line, but protein development is so important with brain development and being able to reason. And so when those types of things are deprived from our diet, and when we don't have access to things like that, the implications they speak for themselves. But yeah, Amos does talk about, protein and its role in brain development and things that we're really exposed to from pretty much the minute that we're born. So I really want to know what you guys have to think. I see we got 20 people watching. So yeah, don't be shy. Please drop a comment. I promise you I'm not going to bite. I really want to know what you guys have to say, what you guys think. This is such important content for us to really ponder on and discuss that I just really want to hear what y'all have to think. So, what y'all have to say. Let me see. Am I missing anything in my notes? I defined that. So when he goes into social services provided by a country, he at the bottom of page 17 that says the social services provided by a country are of importance equal to that of its material production in bringing about human well-being and happiness. And then when we're talking about social services, we're talking about getting access to food. We're going to your government and requesting access to food, access to resources, here it would be like electricity, gas, if that's what you use to heat your home, being able to live a basic quality of life, but, being able to also have access to amenities as well. Diva says, I had so much to say and not typing. Speed to type it. Well, type it anyway, Diva. Type as much as you want to because we can go back. I'm just going through it because I know it's a lot to cover in a short period of time. It's already 11:39 and I'm not even halfway through this section. So I want to make sure we get to it. But even if you have to go back, that's cool. I think it's so important. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about social services. It's universally accepted that the state has the responsibility to establish schools and hospitals, but whether these are provided by the government or by private agencies, their numbers can be established in relation to the size of the population. The extent to which basic goods and social services are available in a country can also be measured indirectly by looking at the life expectancy, the frequency of deaths among children, the amount of malnutrition, the occurrence of diseases which could be prevented by inoculation, and public health services. So these are things that they can put in your country, your society, in order to prevent the deaths from happening. And then he goes into, he's about to go into this now, and the proportion of illiterates, people who can't read. In all these respects, the comparison between the developed and underdeveloped countries shows huge and even frightening differences. For every 1,000 children who are born alive in Cameroon, 100 never live to see their first birthday. That's 10%. 10%. And 10% of babies that die before they even reach the age of 1. This is Cameroon. This is an African country. And out of every 1,000 African children born alive in rural Sierra Leone, 160 die before reaching a year. So that's more than 10%. That's 16%. 16%. So not yet 20%, but almost, that don't live to see their first birthday. Yet the comparable figures in the United Kingdom and Holland are only 12 and 18 respectively. So 12 babies out of the same figure die in these other countries, in the United Kingdom and Holland, these European countries. Besides, many more African children die before they reach the age of 5. Lack of doctors is a major drawback in Italy. In Italy, there is one doctor for every 580 Italians, and in Czechoslovakia, there is one doctor for every 510 citizens. In Niger, one doctor must do, y'all, this figure. Y'all, okay, in Niger, one doctor must do for 56,140 persons. In Tunisia, one doctor for every 8,320 Tunisians. And in Chad, one doctor for every, wait for it, 73,460 persons. How much health care could you possibly get if you have one doctor for nearly 100,000 individuals? I need to know that. And, well, I'll go into that in a minute. It says here, it takes a large number of skilled people to make an industrial economy function, while countries of Africa have a woefully insufficient number of highly qualified personnel. The figures on doctors just given confirm this, and the same problem exists with engineers, technicians, agriculturalists, and even administrators and lawyers in some places. Middle-level skills in fields such as welding are also lacking. To make matters worse, there is at present a brain drain from Africa. This is what I wanted to go into. Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Western Europe. This is to say, professionals, technicians, high-level administrators, and skilled workers immigrate from their homes, and the small number of skilled people available to the underdeveloped world is further depleted by the lure of better pay and opportunities in the developed world. So, we just saw those figures, and Diva, you have no idea. Yes, it is. But what I've seen, because I work in the health setting, the healthcare field, we do have a lot of doctors. What I've seen, and this is just my personal observation, is that you have a lot of people that come here from places like Nigeria, and they practice medicine here. And I've talked to some of them, and they're like, yeah, they go back to visit. They still have family there, and they want to go back there, and they have a very real connection to their home. But as far as ever having go back there to practice, it's almost like it's out of the question. It's not. Why would I want to go back there when I could come here, make a living, and have a better quality of life and everything? And it is infuriating and depressing, because it's those skills that we do need in our motherland are being sucked out, just like everything else, and going to Europeanized countries such as the USA and other places in Europe, and everything that we need doctors there. I mean that figure in Chad, one doctor for 73,460 persons. Like, how do you even get a quality? How do you even get a quality exam? Or even, I mean, 73,000 people. You're the only doctor there. Robert says, yes, those with the skills are leaving the continent, and for America and Europe, the West is exploiting Africa for the resources and the brain power. They absolutely are, Robert. I mean, and like I said, I see it in the health setting that I work in. I see it. And they don't have any intentions on going back. They have no intentions on going back whatsoever. I wonder what those figures would be today. I'd be very interested to research and see what those figures are today. And I'm sure that it's worse. So, page 18. So this is what we were talking about, skilled workers. So, so that goes outside of like the healthcare, spectrum. It goes into engineers. There's no doubt that the skill is there, or that it can be there. It's where does it find its practice? Where does it anchor itself? And so if it's not servicing or benefiting the people, then it doesn't really do us any good. It's almost like, well, it is like, we have our communities, we have our neighborhoods. You have your skill. We're going to college and we're racking up all this debt that we'll never get rid of. And you leave and you get your skill, and then you move away, you plant yourself in a suburban area, and your skill is going to go better to serving people that don't look like you. And so I mean, 73, I cannot move past that figure. At the bottom of page 18, he says, lack of heavy industry, inadequate production of food, unscientific agriculture. Those are all characteristics of the underdeveloped economies. So these are things that this is what makes a country underdeveloped. And then also, he says it over and over again, the typical underdeveloped country also typically has an exploitive relationship with another country that is putting them in that exploitive predicament to begin with. Let's see. I'm going to have to move, but what aggravates the situation is that more people are employed with those jobs than are really necessary. So here I've moved into where they're talking about, like, even in those particular countries and civilizations that have, there is a class of people that tend to take a disproportionate amount of the wealth. So you have, even in those African countries or those other countries, Latin American countries and things of that sort, you have people that are employed at a certain level where they get a certain amount of wealth, whereas people that are in working class, they typically do not. So this is at the page of 19. It says much of the national income which maintains the country goes to pay individuals who are not directly involved in producing wealth, but only rendering auxiliary services, civil servants, merchants, soldiers, entertainers. Those are the people who get the wealth that comes in, which we saw that graph is not much anyway. And then it says what aggravates the situation is that more people are employed in those jobs than are really necessary to give efficient service. To crown it all, these people do not reinvest their agriculture or industry. They squander the wealth created by the peasants and workers by purchasing cars, whiskey, and perfume. So basically, petty bourgeoisie. That's what we're talking about here. Members of the privileged groups inside Africa always defend themselves by saying that they pay taxes, which keep the government going at face value. And this is why I can really appreciate this book already. Walter Rodney is not mincing any bones about it. At face value, this statement sounds reasonable, but on close examination, it's really the most absurd argument and shows total ignorance of how the economy functions. Taxes do not produce national wealth. and development, wealth has to be produced from nature, from tilling the land or mining metals, felling trees, or turning raw materials into finished products for human consumption. These things are done by the vast majority of the population, who are peasants and workers. So you have these industrial civilizations that can produce these things on a large scale and have the ability to mass produce food, mass produce, even on a farming, even if you wanted to say, we're not necessarily talking about processed food. We're talking about just being able to mass produce crops and mass produce the ability to get water out to everybody and things of that sort. That's what we're talking about. So just being able to manipulate the nature into being able to really just produce for its entire human population. But they want you to believe that it's okay. Well, I'm paying my taxes. I work, so I'm supporting somebody didn't put a statistic up. Let me go back. Okay, Robert says natural minerals coming from Africa, depending on countries, varies from 22 up to 90%. Back in 64%, maybe even back in 1964. Let me see. Probably higher now. I agree, Robert. It's definitely higher. I want to know what the resources are, what those figures are for today, and I have no doubt that the disparities have widened. Himani says, yeah, the creation of the bureaucratic bougie class by European capital is also intense. The number of politicians per person in Africa and other privileged groups compared to Africa blew my mind. Yep. That is exactly what they teach us. Can't stay in the hood if you want to be somebody. They do teach us that. They exploit everything that we are able to obtain. They don't want you using it to build up your people, and they definitely don't want you to let the working class people know that. Yeah, so he's highlighting that the petty bourgeoisie and their role in putting things in this context. He also goes into, he says, the income given to civil servants, professionals, merchants comes from the store of wealth produced by the community. Quite apart from the injustice of the distribution of wealth, one has to dismiss the argument that the taxpayers' money is what develops a country. In pursuing the goal of development, one must start with the producers and move on from there to see whether the products of their labor are being rationally utilized to bring greater independence and well-being to the nation. And in most cases, it's not. By paying attention to the wealth created by human labor out of nature, one can immediately appreciate that few underdeveloped countries are lacking in the natural resources which go into making a better life, and in those cases, it is usually possible for 2 or 3 territories to combine together for their mutual benefit. In fact, it could be shown that the underdeveloped countries are the ones with the greatest wealth of natural resources, which Robert already alluded to. We already know that Africa is a very rich continent when it comes to national resources, yet the poorest in terms of goods and services presently produced by and for their citizens, and that goes into the exploitive nature that we have, that we're talking about with Africa in these European countries. And then there's something that he pulls from, 1964. Yes, Robert, absolutely. Africa is well endowed with mineral and primary energy resources. With an estimated 9% of the world's population, the region accounts for approximately 28% of the total value of world mineral production and 6% of its crude petroleum output. In recent years, its share of the latter is increasing. Of 16 important metallic and non-metallic minerals, the share of Africa in 10 varies from 22 to, yes, that's what Robert would say. Okay, thank you, Robert, for that. Yeah, this is a lot of information. And so again, trade really should be in our benefit. As far as Africa is concerned, it should be in our benefit because we have access to all these natural resources. Why then are we underdeveloped or so poor? There's only one question. There's really only one answer to that, and that's due to the exploitation. I love how he brings in South Africa, because we know about South Africa and the apartheid and the colonizers that still live in South Africa and think that they have some claim to the land. He says, thus, South Africa boasts about having the highest per capita income of Africa, but as an indication of how this is shared out, one should note that while the apartheid regime assures that only 24 white babies die out of 1,000 live births, they are quite happy to allow 128 African babies to die out of 1,000 live births. That's 12.8%. Of actual African babies dying in South Africa compared to 24%. So what is that? That is 10%. So that's 2.4%, which is very telling. And then on page 21, this is where they go into, what I had kind of alluded to a little earlier. He talks about, this is where they kind of tie morality into why these countries are so underdeveloped and have fallen behind. Presumably, the only comment which one can make on that is amen. The interpretation that underdevelopment is somehow ordained by God is emphasized because of the racist trend in European scholarship. It is in line with racist prejudice to say openly or to imply that their countries are more developed because their people are innately superior, and that the responsibility of the economic backwardness of Africa lies in generic backwardness in the race of Black Africans. So basically, it's intrinsic that Africa is the underdeveloped because they're evil and we're superior. We're, and we not that we stole this from y'all, not that we violated our own tenets of what it means to be moral and good from our own Bible, but that we, that we stole from y'all, that we treated y'all like anything but a neighbor. We just came and just ripped stuff from your land, said we were civilizing you and stealing your resources so we can make a profit off of it, which is why your land is as underdeveloped as it is. So I appreciated that he outlined that. So what do you guys think? So far, Diva said thieves. Yep, girl, I agree. What do y'all think about this so far? It's, when I tell you my whole book was highlighted. Because that's what I'm saying. I could easily go into this a lot more, because it's just so much that you could skip over. So anybody else got any read that backs? I really want to go over that. Just a reminder, this is a fundraiser, so if you can donate to BH Book Club, it's all together. Feel free to do that. We're always trying to make this better as far as presentation for you. But it does. It brings about a flurry of emotions, but also it can help us to be better materialists too. Because, when we see this is how this came to be in the first place, it really lays a roadmap and helps us to create a blueprint of our own of how to regain ownership. And y'all, if you haven't gotten your hands on one of these, you should. It has our principles of unity in it. And really quick before we get back into the text, principle number 1 says, we believe that the colonized proletariat should have dictatorship over our lives, labor, land, and resources. And really all the principles, we have 4 principles of unity, and they're all relevant in how we would control our resources and what we feel that we should have access to and how we should go about creating our freedom. So get your hands on this pamphlet if you haven't already. It's got all of our principles of unity on it, and it's very relevant to how we move from this point forward. So this book, this text helps to put everything into perspective, to understand how these things came to be, because it's one thing for us to be mad and angry about what has happened to us as a people, and it's very that anger is justified in it, but you could do something with that anger by building to take back all of our stuff. I'm trying not to cuss so we can boost this, but it's hard. But anyway, so it's necessary for us to focus on this. And again, I think it helps us to be better materialists. On page 22, he goes into how, humans have, we've always used this environment for our benefit. And really, it could be a mutual relationship that we have with nature. And at one point, it actually was. trees put trees put oxygen into the air. We breathe out carbon dioxide. And so there's a mutual relationship between us and plants and trees and things like that. That's a good relationship. So we can still utilize the resources of this land to benefit us as a people and everything, but it doesn't have to be at a destructive level. So on page 22, this third paragraph down, he says, man has always exploited this. Sorry, y'all, my daddy calling. Man has always exploited his natural environment in order to make a living. At a certain point in time, there also arose the exploitation of man by man, in that a few people grew rich and lived well through the labor of others. Okay, there was a stage that was reached by which people in one community called a nation exploited the natural resources and the labor of another nation and its people. Since underdevelopment deals with the comparative economics of nations, it is the last kind of exploitation that is of greatest interest here. The exploitation of nation by nation. One of the common means by which one nation exploits another, and one that is relevant to Africa's external relations, is exploitation through trade. And this is what we were talking about a little earlier. When the terms of trade are set by one country in a manner entirely advantageous to itself, then the trade is usually detrimental to the trading partner. To be specific, one can take the export of agriculture produce from Africa and the import of manufactured goods into Africa from Europe, North America, and Japan. The big nations establish the price. So that's where I'm talking about. The price is established by those exploitive countries to begin with. Of the agricultural products, and the subject these prices to frequent reductions. At the same time, the price of manufactured goods is also set by them, along with the freight rates necessary for trade in the ships of those nations. The minerals of Africa also fall into the same category as agricultural produce as far as pricing is concerned. The whole import-export relationship between Africa and its trading partners is one of unequal exchange and exploitation. So if they're setting the prices for the goods that come out of Africa, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to set it at a fair price to where Africa actually has a chance to compete in this capitalist enterprise? Or are they going to say, oh, we're only going to pay this for that? I mean, just think about some of the resources that come from Africa and formulate your question. Because chocolate, I mean, that's the thing that comes to mind to me, because of the nature in which it's harvested, where it comes from, and the fact the pricing is what it is. So like companies like Nestle, Mars, Hershey's, they're all very exploitive. And this is African children who have to mine this crop, and they pay pennies for it. And you should, if you haven't already, you should look up the story behind how chocolate is traded. And there's a reason why some people buy chocolate that's like fairly traded, even though there's an exploitive nature even with that. But fair trade chocolate, and I don't want to, I'm not going to buy Hershey's anymore. And I mean, I think it's a noble thing to do, but that's just one thing of many that's being exploited at Africans' expense. And the trade prices that are set for that are indicative of that. And again, we're talking about 1960s here. So the prices, the trade prices, that not much has changed, but I'd be interested to know like how some of those prices, what those prices look like today. And my understanding is that it has gotten worse. So I'd like to know what you guys think. Black Power Jamal, thank you for joining us. Let me see what else you guys had to say. Himani said, for real, decolonization is about taking back our land and resources. Absolutely. This content is eye-opening. Robert, tell me about it. I mean, I had to reread some things just to make sure I really internalized it, but it's such important content. And I mean, I really think I'm going to be a changed person after reading this book. Yeah, y'all, it's a lot of really important information that we're dealing with here. And just really for context, let's see what Robert said. Think of how many Africans were killed by Leopold for rubber. and Africans didn't get any wealth from the millions of deaths of their countrymen. Absolutely. And Diva says, just fill me with this knowledge, because when you go around like I do telling folks how the U.S. steals everything by exploiting poor folks everywhere, it makes me sound crazy without having this kind of knowledge to back it up. And now, right, and now you do. And that's what I'm saying. That's why it's so informative. And again, I need you guys to remember, Walter Rodney was assassinated. He's not still here. I mean, and I don't know how old he would be if he was, but he was assassinated. They had to assassinate him for putting. I'm surprised this book is even still accessible. But I mean, it also takes it has to get into people's hands, and for us to do what we need to do with the information in order for it to really mean anything. So, going into page 23, he talks about foreign investments and how it takes the form of loans to Africa. So we getting into like how Africa is further being exploited, like through trade agreements, loans, and then we're also talking about where does he talk about it? Aid, foreign aid, right? So foreign investments often take the form of loans to African governments. Naturally, these loans have to be repaid. In the 1960s, the rate of repayment amortization of official loans in underdeveloped countries rose from $400 million per year to about $700 million per year. And it is constantly on the increase. Besides, there is interest to be paid on these loans, as well as profits from which the direct investment in the economy. So this money that they get is loans. Of course, they want all of it back with interest. But you have these if you remember those per capita statistics, how are they ever going to be able to repay that? You're not able to make money off of your natural resources because they're setting the prices for it. How do you even have a chance to compete? How do you even have a chance? So again, it's really just a new form of enslavement, because you're never going to pay that debt off. Ever. He goes down and says, further, in more recent times, the forms of investment have become more subtle and more dangerous. They also include so-called aid in the management of local African companies by international capitalist experts. He goes into, it says, Africa trades mainly with the countries of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Africa is also diversifying its trade by dealing with socialist countries. If that trade proves disadvantageous to the African economy, then the developed socialist countries will have also joined the ranks of exploiters in Africa. So yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that, because if you're a socialist country, then I don't think you can partake in a trade interaction that would be in an exploitive nature, because that's kind of contradictory to what a socialist economy would be. However, it is very essential that at this stage to draw a clear distinction between capitalist countries and the socialist ones, because socialist countries have never at any time owned any part of the African continent, nor did they invest in African economies in such a way as to expatriate profits from Africa. Therefore, socialist countries are not involved in the robbery of Africa. Now, I made a note here, and this is something I don't have a lot of, I can't really go into it, but I think I made a note here because I wanted to learn more about China's investment in Africa and the move. We're in 2019 and we're dealing with that. So I want to know how that ties into that, because China has always known to be a socialist government, a communist government. So if anybody can sound off about that in the comments, I would be appreciative, because that's what came to mind when I read that paragraph. And I don't know if that implies that China is shifting away from socialism and communism and going into capitalism, because he did mention that earlier in this chapter. He talks about how, what did he say exactly? He said that China had actually skipped the capitalist phase, because remember, we had communalism, then it goes into slavery, then it goes into feudalism, then capitalism, and then socialism. That was the natural progression of things, or what we've seen in a lot of countries and civilizations. And he says that China actually skipped that stage. So I don't know if but there's some sort of, it to me seems like the nature of China's involvement in Africa it appears to be exploitive. So I'd appreciate anybody's input on that. Let's see what you guys had to say. Black Power Tim, thank you for joining us. Share if you haven't already. France alone gets 13 to 15 billion out of African countries per year. And I want to say, maybe I'm thinking about Haiti. Somebody's getting reparations out of, I think it's out of Haiti though. But yeah, I'm so happy that I was able to catch this, but I have to go make breakfast. Okay, go take care of the babies. We will see you next week, sis. But yeah, I mean, y'all, I really would like to hear anybody's input on that. Let's see. I think I made some other notes. What do you guys have to say, though? I mean, there's a lot of information that we're going over, and if you have to go back, that's cool too. But I want to hear what you all have to say. This was a heavy, heavy chapter. Lots of information to really internalize. Yeah, I mean, I really want to know what you guys have to say. Really quick on page 185, because I know we're in the interest of time. I want to make sure we get through the entire chapter. On page 25, he goes into African economies are integrated into the very structure of the developed capitalist economies, and they are integrated in a manner that is unfavorable to Africa, so already exploitive in nature, and ensures that Africa is dependent on the big capitalist countries. That's why we're seeing like how these loans are coming about, and how they'll never be able to pay them back. They basically entrapped them into this exploitive relationship, slave master type relationship that they'll never be able to overgo. So that's capitalism. Most progressive writers divide the capitalist imperialist system into two parts. The first is the dominant or metropolitan section, and the countries in the second group are called the satellites because they are in orbit around the metropolitan economies. And so that's just basically where you have these countries in Africa that have these puppet regimes in place where they don't really have the interests of the people at heart. They're trying to fill their own pockets, but they carry out the interests of the U.S. and the European countries and that type of thing. Something I think is really important here on page 25, he says dependent nations can never be considered developed. So any nation that is dependent on another for its aid, for its money, for its resources and export and that type of thing, that type of relationship, it cannot be considered a developed country in and of itself. It says it is true that modern conditions force all countries to be mutually interdependent in order to satisfy the needs of their citizens, but it's not compatible with economic independence, because economic independence does not mean isolation. And how I view what he just said there is, Africa is rich as it is in its natural resources, it would still need certain things to come from other parts of the world in order to make the industrialized or the economic development it would need to be able to stand on its own feet. But it doesn't mean that it can't be in a dependent relationship, which is what we're seeing. Africa is in a predicament to where it's being exploited, not where it's like, okay, we have these resources, you have those resources, we'll give you these resources for this resources, and it's kind of like a level playing field as far as trade goes. We don't have that right now. You have these capitalist countries up here, you have Africa here, and even though it has all these resources, they set the price for how they get those resources, and they really get nothing in return. It does, however, require a capacity to exercise choice in external relations, and above all, it requires that a nation's growth at some point must become self-reliant, self-sustaining. Such things are obviously an indirect contradiction to the economic dependence of numerous countries on the metropoles of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Oh, y'all, this is so heavy. It's just so much information in here. Okay, so yeah, let me see what Robert had to say. So it says the Chinese are making loans to African countries with high interest rates. They they are also exploiting the continent for resources. They're now just solidifying their place on the continent. Yeah, that I just got the sense that it was an exploitive relationship, and I knew that it didn't seem like Africa was really benefiting from that. And that's what came to mind when I was reading that paragraph. On page 26, he he says it's the, well, I keep saying page numbers like we all have the same version, and I know we don't. But I am reading. Oh, let's see. It's not far before the chapter ends, but there's a paragraph that says something as basic as language that has to serve as one of the mechanisms of integration and independence. The French and English that are so widely used in Africa are more for the purpose of African communication with the exploiters than African with African. So I thought that said something that spoke to me as well. And it says, actually, it would be difficult to find a spirit which did not reflect an the economic dependence and structural integration. So it's like, in order to trade, even, you don't even have the ability. You have to utilize their language, and you're kind of on their terms. And I think that just kind of sets the motion, that the stone, what we're seeing, like, as far as, like, you really don't have any type of control over in this arena, in this